Mark Siomo, I'm the chairman of Ways and Means and the Alston-Brighton District City Councilor. Today is it still Thursday, May 2nd? Third, see. I'd just like to remind folks that this is a public hearing, both being broadcast live and recorded on RCN Channel 82, Comcast Channel 8, as well as Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. I'll ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the department's presentation and questions from my colleagues, we'll take public testimony. There's a sign-in sheet by the door. I ask that you state your name, residence, affiliation, and please check the box if you do wish to testify. We encourage anyone at home watching us or anyone hearing us to get involved in these budget hearings. There are numerous opportunities over the next several weeks to do that by, as I said earlier, coming here and testifying, but also you can email the committee, which is at ccc.wm@boston.gov, snail mail at Boston City Hall, Committee on Ways and Means, 1 City Hall Plaza, Boston 02201. And there is a hearing set aside for public testimony alone on June 5th between 2 and 6 p.m. We are here with our friends from the Boston Public School System regarding dockets 0559 through 0563, orders for the fiscal year 19 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, annual appropriation for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, appropriation for certain transportation and public realm improvements, and appropriation for certain park improvements, as well as dockets 0564 through 0565, capital budget appropriations, including loan orders and lease and purchase agreements. I am joined by several of my colleagues. To my immediate left, Councilor at Large and Education Chairman Anissa Sabi-George. To my far left, District City Councilor Ed Flynn. To my right, District City Councilor Matt O'Malley and Council President Andrea Campbell. Thank you all again, and I apologize for the delay and won't delay this any longer. Take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, Council and Councilors. I am Colin Rose. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Opportunity Achievement Gap, and I will lead off this round of asset presentations, sticking to a tight script so that we can get through it and then get on to questions. First, I'd like to talk first about my office and kind of our philosophy. Eliminating opportunity achievement gaps are not only vital for our school system, but for our society. We are getting closer and closer to a majority-minority society and need to have a sense of urgency. What we do or don't invest in today to create equity will pay us back down the road one way or the other. Our role is to lead the system in addressing cultural and structural barriers for those students who have been historically marginalized so that they are provided the opportunities necessary for college, career, and life readiness. We feel that opportunity gaps manifest themselves into achievement gaps, and so that's where the main focus is for us. Much of our role as an office is to create and push the equity innovations that will close the gaps of access and opportunity, working with all offices in BPS. As you can see in slide 4, we still have persistent achievement gaps, both in ELA and math, according to our MCAS tests. The same is true around our 4-year graduation rates. It's fairly steady. You have a little bit of bump for our Asian population and our Latino population, but again, we still have persistent gaps between subgroups. We do have some good news around some of our leading indicators of success, such as suspension, where not only are the rates down across all of our subgroups, but the gaps between Black, Latino, and students with disabilities are slimming compared to their counterparts. I think this is a testament to a lot of the efforts around restorative justice and our initiatives around culturally and linguistically sustaining practices taking a hold. Our office has three major strategic priorities. One around, and we kind of call it the student, the adults, the system. So for the adults, we do a lot of capacity building. For students, targeted programming. And then there's a big piece of systemic oversight and strategy. In our efforts for capacity building, we are pushing what we are calling culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, or CLSP. This is our take on cultural proficiency, or the ability to work effectively across cultural boundaries. This is a body of work ultimately asking us to think about how we leverage the unique cultural and linguistic strengths of our diverse student body to create more equitable conditions in our schools and our district. We have brought this learning over the past 2 years to all principals, BPS department heads and cabinet members, lead teachers, parents, community members through such forums as our speaker series and parent universities, many of our partner organizations, and have even begun work with some of our university partners around the courses that they are providing to their undergrad and grad students. We have also worked very closely with other asset members to make sure that CLSP is the foundation of our instructional vision, namely the essentials for instructional equity that I'm sure academics went through during the morning. As for programming, our specific programming, we intend to empower historically marginalized populations to be agents of their own success and counteract some of the toxins in our society targeted towards them. In this area, we have many innovative programs that are growing. An example of that is the 10 Boys Initiative, which engages boys and young men of color in middle and high school in coursework that is focused on academic rigor, real talk, community service, peer mentoring, and physical challenges. It has grown to serve over 330 young men and BPS in over 35 schools. The 10 Girls program, which started last year in a couple of our schools, has grown to around 120 young women across 13 BPS schools. Another example is Excellence for All, the Excellence for All model, whose ultimate goal is to create rigorous educational experiences for all students. This pilot is in 13 schools in 4th and 5th grade and will be expanding to 6th grade next year. I will expand on EFA in a couple minutes as we have a couple of dedicated slides to this important work. Finally, we have the systemic work to try to address structural and systematic barriers. A major piece of this work is the OAG policy and implementation plan. The goals within the implementation plan, which works with every single office across BPS, range from more culturally responsive food choices in our cafeterias to decolonizing the curriculum and everything in between. One of those pieces that are in between is the Opportunity Index, which, again, we'll explore a little bit in more detail a little bit later. Beyond that, our office has continued to grow in partnerships with scholars in other districts across the country, such as Oakland and New York City. We work with AERA, which is the American Educational Research Association, to become a professional learning community around opportunity and achievement gaps and equity in general in school districts. Slide 8 is our budget. This is our all funds budget for fiscal year 19. As you can see, the major bulk of our funding in the office lies within the Excellence for All initiative. Other major areas of spending, of course, are our staffing, which will include 6.6 FTE next year, dollars for our targeted programs, as well as our capacity building efforts across the district. Now I'd like to highlight EFA, since it is the largest piece of our budget. And I wanted to highlight a few things in particular. First, the pillars. The pillars of our model include rigorous instruction that creates access points for all students, quality enrichment such as robotics, coding, and foreign language that previously was not available to most students in BPS. Social emotional supports for student learning, executive functioning, so how students make sense of and organize their thoughts and their work, and personalized supports for students on different trajectories. EFA's reach in the district is truly reflective of the demographics of our system, which is why it's so important to closing opportunity gaps in rigor. EFA is attempting to bring access to high-rigor classwork to all students. One of the main strategies outlined by scholars looking at the opportunity gap within our district in 2014 and 2015. EFA is not a program, per se. Rather, it is a model to inform the district about the necessary conditions for all students to achieve and thrive while engaging with high-demanding coursework. So, moving forward, our next steps for EFA will be to support 6th grade in EFA, both at the schools that currently have a 6th grade, but also at a few of our middle schools who are pathways from some of the schools that are K-5. We're going to be looking at and doing some research studies with universities around the impact and how we might be able to scale. And then, again, explore what scaling looks like beyond year 3 of this pilot, including looking at an accreditation process. Some of the successes to date are students completing capstone projects, which are interdisciplinary hands-on projects that show kind of the breadth of learning in a year. EFA students were at the top of the placements in coding competitions and robotics competitions in BPS this year. And some data patterns that are encouraging, especially around student growth in ELA and in writing, and in some cases with our most marginalized subgroups. Next, I'd like to turn our attention to the Opportunity Index briefly. This is an index that is particularly attached to the OAG implementation plan. It was something outlined in the engagement goals within that implementation plan. It is in line with the district's theory of action around schools being the units of change. And the OI is trying to bring more equity to the funding streams that go to each school. While our weighted student formula does a pretty good job around equity and pushing money towards things we can traditionally measure and account for, there are many things outside the school context that affect student outcomes. The index is trying to bring more nuance to that type of need that was currently only being measured and accounted for by the economically disadvantaged measure, which is fairly blunt. That is that blunt tool that talks about are you on public assistance or not. That doesn't do a great job of differentiating need across our schools. It makes our schools look very, very similar when we know anecdotally and by experiences they are not. On slide 17, you'll see that these are the final variables that are included in the index that went into the application this year. There are 3 levels of variables across 3 distinct grade spans. For neighborhood level, we're not talking about traditional neighborhoods, so we're not talking about Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. We're talking about 177 distinct census tracts, so we can get to a very minute level. Where you see check marks on this, and we can get into it later, is where the variables that matter at the different spots in our trajectory in education. So at the elementary level, the ones with the check marks are the variables that attach to student performance in elementary, and then you see in the middle the middle schools, and at the end, high school. Finally, slide 18 shows how the index was created for each school. And so basically, each student is given a score relative to their peers when you aggregate the neighborhood experience, the family experience, and some leading indicators of success attached to their student profile. That's aggregated, and each student is given a score from 0 to 1. From that, the student body within a school is given, is averaged to give the school a score from 0 to 1, so that we can then compare the relative concentration and need across all of our schools. And so I'm sure we'll have a little bit more discussion around that when questions come up, but for now I'd like to pass the presentation on to Cindy Nielsen, who will take us through special education.
Thank you. Before you begin, I just want to recognize we've been joined by District City Council Lydia Edwards. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and councilors. I'm Cindy Nielsen. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Special Education. The Office of Special Education is in the third year of building inclusive practices across the district through identification and placement, quality of instructional supports and services, students, family, and community engagement, equity and accountability, or compliance, and in our transition services. As of mid-April 2018, about 21% of our student population are students with disabilities. Of that 21%, approximately 1/3 of our students are also English learners. There is a 2% decrease of students being placed in substantially separate settings, bringing us to a 5% decrease in students in sub-separate settings from school year 2014-15. Regarding our out-of-district students, they are represented in two groups: state-involved and non-state involved. State-involved students indicate that the Department of Children and Families, Department of Mental Health, or the Department of Public Health made a determination that the student's resident would be in the residential setting. We are then responsible for the school day portion of that placement. We do not have any influence over this decision. Other state-involved students include students associated with the Department of Youth Services and the Department of Corrections. Non-state involved students indicate that students were placed through the team process, mediation, settlement agreement, BSEA decision, or a student moving in from another district with this type of IEP already written. We had a decrease of 13 students in out-of-district settings from school year 16-17. The majority of this reduction is with state-involved students. Though the number 13 may seem small, there is a savings here in both tuition and transportation. This slide organizes the data by primary disability. We further broke down the disabilities into high incidence, low incidence, and spectrum disabilities. High incidence disabilities are disabilities that are socially constructed and determined as part of the evaluations that are administered by educators, related service providers, psychologists, etc. Low incidence disabilities are diagnosed by the medical community, and the information provided to us by the medical community informs our instruction. Spectrum disabilities indicate our students with autism and developmental delay. When we break down each disability by race, we see that there is much more work that needs to be done regarding our Black students being diagnosed with emotional and intellectual impairments, and our Hispanic students being diagnosed with communication and specific learning disabilities at a higher rate than their peers. As an update on our investments from FY18, we started the Ed Plan rollout in late August 2017 to replace the SIMS IEP system. The move to this system has allowed for a better understanding of compliance with state and federal laws, allows for much easier IEP completion, and is building a strong and interactive online student record for our students and for our school staff and families. We also moved to Ed Plan for our 504 assessment and documentation. A parent portal will be piloted in May and June in a small set of schools, and the full rollout of the parent portal will be available in September of 2018. The inclusive support teams are a huge success in the schools. This year we had 12 team members, 8 teachers, and 4 community field coordinators positions. The team served the TLTs, providing direct support to schools, classrooms, and students. Next year we will be adding 4 more community field coordinators to expand our teams. And our work in transition continues to get stronger. In our third year of committing $1 million per year, we have built and maintained strong partnerships in the community, increased opportunities for our students 14 to 22 to learn the skills they need to be in college, career, and life ready. In FY19, centrally funded special education services increased by 3%. We have made investments, but most importantly, we are able to continue the work that we have been doing. We are also focused on converting our contracts to hire more BPS staff instead of contractors. And this last slide breaks down our central office personnel with the number of FTEs and the associated salaries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and councilors. My name is Priya Tihiliani, and I am the new Assistant Superintendent for the Office of English Learners. I've had the honor of serving in this position for the past year, so it is my pleasure to present to you our accomplishments. Our work at OELL supports over 24,000 students, or the 44% of BPS students who are either current English learners or former English learners. Collectively, our ELs represent over 100 different countries and speak over 70 different languages, constituting one of the greatest assets that BPS has. Though the majority of our English learners are at the early developmental stages of English language proficiency and are found in elementary grades, we are very committed to making sure that we are providing support for students at all grade levels and all levels of proficiency. And we have prioritized our work accordingly. Our first priority is to ensure instructionally sound programs, both during the school day and in the form of supplemental services that are aligned to the English language development curriculum and core content standards. We also provide professional learning to school leaders, educators, and district staff to build the capacity that they need in order to support that language development and instruction. We support schools to ensure that our English learners are receiving the requisite services as mandated by the state, local, and federal governments. We continue to promote engagement of our English learner parents with community partners and schools. For example, our District English Learner Advisory Council is made up of parents of our English learners, and they are tasked with advising us on how to best enhance our instructional programs and our services for English learners. Our Newcomers Assessment and Counseling Center provides language proficiency assessments to identify English learners and their level of English language acquisition. They also counsel parents to ensure that the students are receiving the best program that is offered by the city. Lastly, we ensure communications are translated and interpreted so that parents can get meaningful access to their students' education and to district policies. This next slide represents how we have aligned our budget to fund these priorities for this year and next year. As demonstrated in the chart on the right, while there is a recommended increase overall, our spending for various priorities has remained generally proportional. Some notable investments include our commitment to providing high-quality ESL core curriculum and to include new programs as offered by the Look Act. Our largest investment for both this year and next has been around providing translations and interpretations to families so that they can get meaningful access to their students' education. We are proud to report that we have provided over 22,000 translations and interpretations to families this year. Those are in 29 different languages, not only our 9 major languages, but all languages that are requested, including Urdu, Mandinka, Amharic, and Pashto. As we approach the second year of implementing a fully realized translation and interpretation unit, we are better able to forecast the district's needs moving forward and implement processes that provide services in the most fiscally efficient manner, including translation, interpretation, and memory software. In an effort to ensure that all schools and parents understand their rights to these services, we are providing constant outreach and training to schools. Finally, to create more safe and welcoming environments in our school systems, we are going to be providing language toolkits to parents and students. They include parents' rights posters, translated signage, parent brochures, and I Speak cards that can be used by students and parents to show school staff when they need language assistance. I'd like to conclude by highlighting some of our bright spots from this year. First, we are proud to be expanding our dual language programs for all of our students, not only our English learners. We were excited to establish the first ever K-1 Haitian Creole dual language classroom in the country this past year. And next year, we will be implementing a Spanish heritage language program at the Quincy Upper, along with the state's first Chinese heritage language program. We also started the school year collaborating with several city council agencies, BPS departments, and community-based organizations to support the students displaced by Hurricane Maria. We prioritized their enrollment in our EL supplemental services programs so that they could get extra access to instructional time and support. And our OEL liaisons actually followed up with every single student and their school to ensure that they had been appropriately placed and that they were receiving the services that they needed. In terms of better supporting our families, we implemented single visit assignment this year. In that way, our Newcomers Assessment and Counseling Center can immediately assign students after language testing rather than having them wait a second step for a school assignment. This year, we also recognized our teachers as the instructional experts that they are and promoted professional learning experiences where they were stipended to share their best practices both at their school sites and on the district level. Finally, each year we have ended our presentation by highlighting the fact that our former English learners outperform other BPS students. This year, as you will see in the appendix, we are also extremely proud to highlight that our BPS former English learners outperform their former English learner peers all throughout Massachusetts. As we celebrate these bright spots, we remain reflective of ways we can improve. Moving forward, we are excited to leverage the new opportunities of the Look Act to introduce more innovative programming for English learners. We do believe that this renewed ability to provide native language supports and to promote bilingualism and biliteracy will allow us to more effectively close the achievement gap for our English learners. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. Before I recognize our Chair of Education, I want to read a brief statement from Councilor Kim Janey. Dear Chairman, due to a longstanding appointment, I will be unable to attend the beginning of this afternoon's hearing. I hope to be able to join you before the end. And signed, sincerely, Kim Janey, District City Councilor, District 7. Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being here. So there's been a lot of conversation about the Opportunity Index. It's been, I think, celebrated publicly at school committee, and there's been some presentations here, and people are excited about this new methodology and this new thinking, but there are also some concerns that were raised in an earlier hearing today and an earlier budget hearing last week and the week before. And specifically today, there was a public testimony regarding an advocacy group's need to FOIA the formula to understand how the Opportunity Index funds were distributed to schools, or will be.
Yeah, I can't speak to the FOIA, but as soon as we were done with the methodology, we presented in front of our school committee and worked hard to create a website that is public, that you can see not only every score of every school, what we put in the formula, and then our two applications through the partnership dollars and the high support need fund, right? And so that's Boston Public Schools /OI. So I can't speak to the FOIA. I didn't know nothing about the FOIA, but we've been trying to be transparent around the OI and our uses of the OI.
All right, the presentation that was presented, I think it's important for us as elected officials to represent
Absolutely.
our constituents and ask their questions if they're unable to. And then the follow-up question to that was the role of the Department of Justice findings as it relates to many of our ELLs and the programming that supports those students, and its relationship to the Opportunity Index. And many of those students, there's a thorough presentation earlier today about a number of our schools with high numbers of Spanish-speaking students that aren't receiving funds through the Opportunity Index.
Okay. Two things. I think one thing, we need to decouple the index from the application. And so the index in and of itself is not telling us how to use what cutoff points in order to make decisions around funding, right? And so that might be true of the partnership dollars. I know the partnership dollars overall aggregate across the system, that 46% of our Latino students, or the demographics of the schools getting funding is 46% Latino students, which is above their proportion within the districts, is about 41%. So I haven't looked at it school to school, but we also have to acknowledge that we have another application of the index that was much more broader, that covered many more schools, and that was the high needs, and I would say that they're hitting most, if not all, of those schools. I would also like to remark that the prior way that we were giving out partnership dollars, all schools were not getting that money. In fact, it was about 60 schools before, and this way that we apply it through the OI has increased the amount of Latino students that are getting supported by partnerships. So we can't create a straw man that this was a perfect system and everybody was getting money and now we're pulling it away. A lot of the schools in which the person was probably talking about weren't getting funded last year either.
Okay, there's, I think, a little bit of anxiety around the changes in the way that schools are receiving funds and partnerships are being supported through this, this new effort. And
Yes.
whenever we have a new effort, there are changes that can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think it's worthwhile to understand why those changes happen and to learn from them, because no rollout of a new program is ever perfect. And, we learn by doing, but I think that sort of experimental feeling is very personal to parents in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to outline the process moving forward. There'll be a reiteration of the index every single year. So I'm shepherding a process right now where we'll have an internal and external advisory group around the variables. We'll take a look at some of the suggestions from our school leaders. And there'll be another index next fall. We have to update the data anyways because it's based on the students that are actually in the seats at the schools. But there'll be a process this spring and summer where we will bring different interest groups together to talk about the index and look more into the variables themselves.
Are schools, through the Opportunity Index, are schools losing any partners?
There are some schools that are losing partnership dollars. Technically, schools never got partnership dollars. Really, centrally, there was a bucket of around $6 million that were allocated to the partners, and then the partners made the relationships with the schools. And so there are some schools that have been negatively effective. I think John Sproul in the partnership office has done a bang-up job around rallying around those schools and talking about how can you save your high leverage partners. But there was some redistribution. So there was schools that some of our highest need schools that never saw a dollar of service from partnerships, simply because, I could talk anecdotally from what some of the principals would tell me, but they said partners didn't want to work with them. And that's an equity issue, right? And so, again, with our theory of action of schools knowing their populations the most and doing the best with their dollars that they can, we push it down to the schools in a formula that is based off of equity. And so, yes, were there some schools that lost? Yes. But I think the vast majority, even those schools, were able to figure out ways to save high leverage partners.
And some of those partnerships, I think, that we've heard the most about have been Playworks, Boston Debate League, Tenacity, and then the Tag Alerta program, which I think we've talked a lot about the first three, but the Tag Alerta program, we had a parent and school, a parent speak about the importance of the Tag Alerta. Can you talk a little bit about or tell us why we're losing the Tag Alerta program?
I think for that,
partnership is being reduced?
I'd like to call up Eleanor.
Sorry,
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks.
That's it for me after her response.
You'll have to forgive me. I've lost my voice a little bit. But Dr. Rose was just speaking about the fact that we believe in schools as a unit of change. I know that might sound a little bit jargony, but you've heard me say we want to empower our school leaders who are closest to our kids to make partner decisions. And one example of why this is so important is because as we were going through this change, we realized that we had found instances, for instance, with Tag Alerta, where there was a discrepancy with what we had in their scope of services versus what was actually being delivered in schools. And, we are all employees that report to the bowling building every day, and yet we believe we need to be very careful that we don't keep too many decisions at bowling that should be at the school level. And we believe that school leaders and school communities that are there at the point of the service delivery, who are every day seeing the impact that a partner can have with their kids, are the ones who should be overseeing that work, so that we don't have those kinds of issues again where the folks at bowling make a decision about what partner should be hired and they think a certain service is happening that's not happening. So Tag Alerta was like our other partners. We worked very closely with them, and these 13 partners that had, for legacy reasons, been part of this pot of central funding. I want to also remind the council that we have dozens of other partners who just happen to be out. This one pot just happened to identify 13 partners who were singled out for central funding. But Tag Alerta and all the other partners were made available to all of the schools, and we really got to hear the voice of the school community in saying which are the partners that we value now that we have control over the dollars.
Yeah, I think specifically for TAG as well, just like Boston Debate League, they have a centralized kind of summer program that we encourage them, and they got funding through our fourth quarter. So that piece where they're bringing together multiple students from multiple schools for summer experiences, we are funding. It's those pieces that, you know, you have to kind of market yourself to the individual schools around the importance is I think it changed for all of our partners that were getting kind of a, you know, I'm going to say a blank check, but they were able to get money and then go and make the relationships. It's much different. It's different for City Year. It's different from Tenacity. It's different for all of our partners. And so they're in the same boat as everybody else. But there was the centralized piece, just like Boston Debate League, we did fund as a district, not through this fund.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just have a quick question for Dr. Rose as well on the indicators. During the testimony, they spoke, one of the testifiers spoke about socioeconomic public assistance, and that you might be missing a lot of young people because their parents aren't on public assistance, therefore they're not getting counted in you know, low income. Yeah. How do you speak to that?
So I think that was part of the reason why we wanted to create this index. You know, like I said in our presentation, other than that economically disadvantaged variable, we didn't really have any measures of outside need other than what we can measure at a school level. And so, you know, that if we were to apply something like the partnership dollars to that, it would be even less nuanced. And so I think some of the things that you see within immigrant neighborhoods get picked up by social capital. And I heard a comment around 311 calls, and I've heard this before. 311 calls wouldn't increase your score; it would lower your score. So immigrant populations or disenfranchised populations, that actually increases your score because what it's saying is you have. It's a social capital measure that talks about basically your relative comfort in navigating the power systems in our city, right? And so your population not using 311 would actually increase your index score, right? It's not because you don't that it's lowering it.
Okay.
And I just want to add, echo what Dr. Rose was saying. Our team is deeply committed to doing everything we can to hunt out pieces of information that are as inclusive and capture every family in Boston as we can. Mm-hmm. It is hard for undocumented families mm-hmm. because they are, by definition, undocumented. Right. So we have been on a hunt for the last 24 months for any source of data that we can use that can improve our visibility. And we, for instance, are broader in our use of data than the state. So when the state uses direct certification as their measure of poverty, they don't include, for instance, CHIP, the child health care mm-hmm. insurance plan. We do. We hunt for every little grain of data that we can to cast as wide a net as we can.
Okay. And these questions aren't meant as criticism. I'm just trying to clarify in my mind. And when you look at the opportunity indicators under leading risk, chronic absenteeism, elementary is not counted. And, you know, I think we spoke a lot about how bad our absenteeism is in Boston Public Schools. Why aren't we identifying that as early as possible so that, and they get some credit, or I don't know what the proper term would be.
I think when we create indices that push resources to schools, we have to be very careful not to create perverse incentives. And so the reason why you don't see any leading indicators of those educational measures is because those measures are taken before the child hits the doorstep of that school, right? And so we wouldn't want to punish a school that's doing a very good job of engaging students and families and making sure that they're coming to schools. Now there's, you know, out of social emotional office, out of my office, initiatives around chronic absenteeism. But when you're thinking about incentivizing things like chronic absenteeism of students within that school and funding for it, we were very careful with the measures to make sure that it was upon entry into the school, which, you know, for elementary kids, you don't have a student profile yet. And so that's why those neighborhood measures and the family measures were the things that stuck.
Right. I would just hope that we have other interventions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rose, I just had one question. I know you highlighted the food program. As it relates to closing the achievement gap. What can we do, especially during non-school time or in the summertime, giving kids and parents access to nutritional programs, to food, whether it's in the weekends or in the summertime? Is there any type of way the school department can partner up with any nonprofits to provide more food during the summertime to some of these families?
Yeah, I think we're encouraging the majority of our students to take part in our summer, fourth quarter summer programming, which, gives free breakfast, free lunch. I think the more we can get the word out that we actually provide year-round free breakfast and free lunch as a district, and communicate where those are. Now, I'm not in food services, so they might be the better people to talk to about that. But I know that it is available in many programs that we run over the summer. We make sure that we have breakfast and lunch for the individuals running through that program. But even if you're not in a BPS summer program, I believe that you still have access to free lunch and free breakfast.
Thank you. And I just have one more question. I know you highlighted our students that came from Puerto Rico. What are we specifically doing for them this summer to help them, whether it's education-wise or social or employment or training, access to job training, medical care? What is this Boston Schools doing to help our Puerto Rican students?
So over the summer, we do provide EL supplemental services and summer services. So we have summer programming, and we have been doing outreach. We do outreach every year to our compensatory students, and we're also including our students from Puerto Rico as well in that group this year. We have found that the most effective way to reach the families is through phone calls. So we will be doing that to the families, for our families that were displaced. Another thing that we are doing is we did receive the immigration grant this year, and that has allowed us to have more resources in order to partner with our CBOs to provide more access to those seats. And we will have transportation again this summer, because we know that was a barrier in the past for students receiving that summer programming. So we will make sure that when we make those calls, they are aware that they will have transportation to participate in those programs.
Excellent, thank you. And if there's anything I can do to be helpful to our Puerto Rican students, would you please let me know?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Colin, you mentioned in the Opportunity Index, because of the whole myriad factors, several schools would lose out on funding. Can you tell me which schools those are?
I don't have the... let me think if I can have the list on me. John Sproul, partnerships. Are you asking specifically for the partnership application?
No, I'm asking, well, yes, both the partnerships and the schools that for the
Yeah, because the OI has a tool, but then there's the application of the partnership dollars. And so do we have a complete list of schools that would be losing funds? John? Yeah, come down.
That's right.
Please into the mic. Yeah.
So in terms of funding, schools actually never really truly received funds. It went directly to the partner. So this was the first, or next year's the next year that they'll be actually receiving the funds.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I only have 5 minutes. Are there any schools that will no longer be able to offer the programs that they are currently offering?
Yes.
Which schools are those?
So it's a kind of a longer list. I mean, I can give you, if it's helpful, I can provide you with a list of schools that might be losing some partners, schools that are gaining partners, schools that are maintaining partners.
That would be helpful.
Are there specific schools you have questions about? Because I could look up a specific school.
No, I mean that's.
I would be listing.
My point is, I think in theory the Opportunity Index makes a lot of sense. As I said when this was first, when Dr. Rose first presented to the council several weeks or months ago, I am concerned about certain schools that are accustomed to offering incredible programming that will no longer be able to, and how we adjust that. I'm I've been here long enough, as is the chair, to remember when we went to weighted student funding, which also makes sense, but there are some bugs there. We allowed for a soft landing in certain cases for a whole host of things, and I think that that's an approach we may want to adopt here as well. So I'll move on from this, but
It's about 6 schools that we're most concerned about that we haven't been able to.
And if you could provide this body through the chairman with that list, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. How many I'm going to just jump around. How many out of district placements are we, our special ed students, do we have for sped students?
The number of students?
Yeah.
We're at 4. Sorry, let me write that for you. This year, we have 459 students.
Okay, and that's a decrease from last year?
Yeah, from 472. Yes.
But it's still a significantly higher increase from 2013, 2014.
It is, yes.
That was 297. This year it's 472. What is that costing us?
The increase, it's the total number.
So what's the total payment that we're paying to out of district?
What we have is 17 million that's in the budget for now, because we also have the circuit breaker that we need to make sure is also included. So that's a state-funded reimbursement to this district for students that are out of district.
Okay, and is that reimbursed at the 100%?
No, it's not. This year, I believe, the last thing I saw, it was it was at 67%. There was an increase at the state level, so it's supposed to be going to 72%.
Okay.
Over a
And
threshold, though. I want to be clear. It's over a certain threshold dollar.
Understood,
Okay.
understood. Okay, and just to remind, since we have so many of your colleagues here, this isn't for you guys. We're still waiting, this body, for my requested last week's budget hearing on our out-of-district placement for Voc Tech schools. I believe it was Norfolk Aggie and a second school that escapes me right now. Minuteman to regional, thank you. Okay, and how has that number gone up? So I appreciate that it has gone down by about 20 or so, or 15 students from last year, but we're still 170 students more from 2 or 3 years ago. What services aren't we able to offer? What students aren't we able to educate?
So when we look at the numbers, from 2013-14 we were talking about to current year, the biggest increase is by about 200 students is in our about 170 or 80 is in our state-involved students, and that's one of our biggest challenges. So the state-involved students we don't have any purview over, which is the challenge that occurs there. When an outside agency decides that residence of the student is going to become a residential placement, we are then responsible for the day placement portion of it, so the school program of it. So we don't take on the residential piece completely. So say if you have a student with DCF and DCF places them at Brandon and Natick as a residential student, they'll take the portion of the residence, but we have to pay for the day school. That's where that biggest increase has come from.
So this has nothing to do with us not being able to offer services to a student. This is another host of sort of complicated issues.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And some of the students that are sent out there are actually general ed students. So.
Do we have any students in Boston that are state involved coming from other cities and towns that we are then getting, the city's getting paid for?
No. We don't have, so if there's students from another district coming to Boston, we're tuitioning in some kids at Horace Mann, the Horace Mann School for the Deaf. Yes, we tuition in there. Sometimes we make arrangements with McKinley, so students might move to another district and they want to, the district they're in wants to send them back, and we'll tuition them in.
But my point is, I want to see, perhaps I'm naive or optimistic, whatever, or another adjective, I want to see the number of out-of-district students to as low as humanly possible. I want to see it as 0. I recognize we all do. The fact that we are now seeing that increase, was this a change from years prior that court-involved students or not court-involved students, that state-involved students, did we not have to pay for that before?
No, I think that the use of cost shares with the outside agencies increased. I think a couple of reasons that I hypothesize is that there's a reduction in their funding or their budget, and there's also a lack of places to put kids to if they're in custody and they need a residence. So the group homes are filled. There's different types.
But none of this is new from 5-10 years ago, yet the number has increased so dramatically.
Yeah.
So is this just a state? I'm more curious. I think there's an issue here at the state level that maybe we should be talking about.
I agree.
Because
that
is
advocacy there would be great, because what happens is that we don't have any say in it, and then the onus is on the district to make sure that we're funding the student that's at the school. Because once it's a residential placement, they don't have, you can't go pick them up If they're living there, you can't pick them up and bring them back to Boston.
No. And again, we want the ultimate concern is making sure these kids who have a whole host of issues that they're dealing with have as sort of their schools are sanctuaries where they can at least, so I don't think that we're
and save
having it.
lives,
So
yeah.
that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And then very briefly before we go, two quick questions. Can you talk a little bit about the Exam School Initiative? I know that BPS worked with the Boston Latin School Association in growing that program. Anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. That's a program that we reformed out of my office. We've worked closely with now Rachel Scarrett around planning, making sure that it's as diverse as we possibly can make it. Again, when we kind of took it over, there was less than 25% representation from our Black and Latino students. We're up over 50% in both of those, and we've expanded. I think last year we had upwards around 675 students, and these are just all fifth grade students.
675, and this summer will be the third year of it, or the second year?
This program's been going on for a long time.
No, I understand that. It's been going on since 2000. Since there's been a new sort of redoubled efforts,
yes,
this will be the second or third year.
And so I think that is almost like a high water mark, because we tried really hard last year to even have more, but when you start getting up towards 700 students that are just fifth graders, you're talking about a good proportion of all of our fifth graders in the district.
And again, we're only looking at data for 1 or 2 years. Did you see an increase in the number of kids of color that were accepted into one of the 3 exam schools?
Absolutely, and I can give you specific numbers in a minute. I have it actually in my notebook, but I think it almost doubled the chances for the students that went through the program versus those that applied and didn't go through the program, Black and Hispanic.
Great. Thank you, Colin.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Councilor Ciamo, and thank you, Kate. And thank you guys for being here, and thank you for the work you're doing. Dr. Rose, I want to applaud your efforts for the Opportunity Index. I think it's important work. I think it's necessary work. We're often throwing around the terms equity. What does that mean? How do you actually apply it to the work? And I think BPS's approach is a little bit more innovative than other tools that are out there. I know that some schools, I do a lot of work with some schools in my Grove Hall area, have been talking about this Opportunity Index really in a better way capturing their need so that they can then advocate for their students when it comes to these limited dollars that we have. Often I hear from folks in my district, largely Mattapan and Dorchester, that these folks over here get more than we do over here. And so how do we push back on that narrative, also understanding that some of that is true based on history. So I applaud your effort and the district's effort in using the index. Many of my questions related to partnership dollars have been answered. I too am interested in seeing the list of not just those folks that are losing, but also folks who are gaining, and the approach or response to them, to those schools that might be losing. I don't think we actually do a great job in communicating to the public what we mean when we say equity, what we mean when we're making these shifts and why they're important. I think we need to do a better job because it's not just, I think people have this, I'm losing and that's it. How do they look at it within a larger system? Because you guys obviously have to look at it within a larger system. And that's often what I'm telling folks on the ground in my district, but wanted to at least give you kudos for the Opportunity Index. I just had a couple of questions, many of which have already been asked and answered. There was a decline in funding related to the IDEA. Just curious, it's almost $500,000. Why the decline in the federal dollars?
The decline in federal dollars was due to the allocation that the government gave to all districts across the nation. So it was a decrease from the federal government.
Do they tell us why?
I don't.
Especially when you look at obviously our district need and our population. Here comes Eleanor running.
But I will say,
you don't have to run.
Coming down. I was surprised it wasn't more, though, very honestly. With just the way the tenor of what's happening with IDEA and what's happening with the education federally, I was surprised it was that low, personally.
Oh, when it comes to our federal funds, every year when we're going through our budget planning process, we do our best to project it. We have a little bit more information now than we had at the time when we did the projection. We don't have the dollars yet. We don't typically get them until early July. Actually, the bill that was passed in DC gives us some hope that some of the federal dollars, Title I, IDEA, Title IV, might be slightly better than our original projection, but we still need to wait and see how DESE splits up the pie.
So that number could be different.
Yeah, every year at this point, we do our best. We follow what's happening in DC. We talk to DESE. It's a really imperfect science. We try to take our best guess at where the federal dollars are going to come out. It's really unfortunate that we don't get the firm dollars until the summer, because it sometimes makes it hard to plan well. Last year, we hit the nail almost quite on the head, if that's easier. We got really close in our projections. The year before, we got a pleasant surprise and got a little more. You know, it's more art than science. But DESE does have a fair amount of discretion in how they divvy up the pie of what comes from DC. So that's the remaining variable.
Okay, that's helpful. I just had another quick question related to the English language learners, and particularly with the new state law that's passed. How are we responding to that? Which, you know, I think a lot of folks have been advocating for years. I want to applaud the district on the Mattahunt front. The response, at least when it comes to the dual language program, has been pretty good. I think how it all happened in the closing and transition was not so great, and I think we hopefully have learned from how you engage parents well and what's effective and what isn't, and that they need to be a part of the process earlier on. Even when we perceive that a school is in crisis, how do we engage parents then and not when we're saying we're going to close or shift? But I'd love to hear more about how does a district going to respond to the new state law?
So currently, the Look Act guidelines from DESE are under public comment. So there is availability for anyone to go on and read the regulations and guidance as they stand right now and put in their thoughts. So that is something that we are actually doing in our department. We're also leading our district English Learner Advisory Committee to be informed about what the passage of the Look Act means and to also be participating in that public comment period. However, we've already gone ahead and started making plans about what this is going to look like. We are excited about the possibility of opening more dual language programs throughout the city. However, the Look Act offers several different things. It offers more flexibility, but it also offers increased access to the seal of biliteracy, and it sort of sanctions native language supports as a good practice. And so one of the things that we've done is we've invested quite a few dollars this year for next year in providing native language resources to our teachers. So many of our teachers already know a lot of the native language resources that are out there because they are and have been best practice, whether they were technically allowed or not. So we did do a survey of what are the resources they would like to see funded, what are the materials they would like, and we have made a purchase already moving forward. We've also set aside dollars in order to provide professional learning to acclimate our teachers into using native language resources in classes more appropriately. And as for the dual language programs, we are currently meeting with all of our community members. Last night, we actually went to the Winship School and were invited there by the principal and the community to talk about a possibility of dual language programming. Right now, we are just educating our community members on what this could look like, the different models that are available to them, and giving them an opportunity to ask questions and sort of seeing what the overall feeling is. Last night, there was a very positive feeling towards the possibility of a dual language program in their future, and so they asked us to come back and have another meeting to get formalized feedback from them. So we will be having several of these meetings throughout the city, again, just to educate our families and to let them know that this is an opportunity that their school can take advantage of at this point. And so we're really excited about that. We do want to see where's the interest the most, and we have ideas for where we would like to see these programs in the next 5 years. However, we would like to engage the community in that conversation. And as for the seal of biliteracy, we are excited. Boston was already implementing the seal of biliteracy for the last 2 years. We had approximately 100 students, 50 students each year from the Muniz who received the seal of biliteracy. And this year we have expanded it. We have 20 more students who just took the assessment at both Brighton High and Excel to show whether or not they are eligible for the seal of biliteracy, and we're also sending out a communication to all principals so that their students, they can identify students that might be interested in this possibility, and next year we will be expanding it to all high schools in a much more formalized fashion.
That's very helpful, thank you. I just have two more things. One is a similar request that I made earlier in the previous hearing, and similar to requests I made in the last fiscal year, which is when we talk about the opportunity gap, the achievement gap, how long it's going to take to close these gaps. I think in the fiscal year budget hearing last year, we got to, someone said about 5 years. And I said, well, that's great. I'd love to see the plan related to that. And then the conversation went into this is, every department has a role to play in closing the opportunity gap and the achievement gap, particularly the achievement gap. And I said, I'd love to see a plan that's written on paper that defines what the goals are for each of those departments in doing that. So for example, earlier today, we were talking about the Office of, say, Human Capital, recognizing the importance of having teachers that that are representative of the student population within BPS. We're not there yet, but laying that out as a one way and one tool that we use to close that achievement gap. And then where are we with respect to that? What timeline attached to that? So just renewing that, I talked about earlier. I understand that this is really within your camp in a lot of ways, Dr. Rose. So bringing that back to see something that's on paper that can be shared with our families. And it doesn't have to be something that's complicated, but people need to know, how does this all connect to the bigger picture? Because then I think it becomes more realistic that we will reach that goal of closing this gap, or maybe we won't. But I know that I share frustrations of many folks when we look at the numbers, and I know it's not entirely the BPS that's going to close all of these. They're connected to so many other services, including poverty, trauma, incarceration, violence, you name it. But at least in the BPS space, you're doing a lot, so how does it connect?
Yeah, and I can certainly send you our OAG policy, and we have an implementation plan with over 120 SMART goals that are measurable, time-bound across all of our district offices. There will be a tracker that will be online for public consumption. We're having it built now. Currently, we do make updates public through our website, but they're on like Google Doc. It's pretty messy, but in very short time, there'll be a public tracker that you can actually see the goals and people's progress towards those goals.
Thanks. And the last thing, and then I'm done, is going back to the exam initiative. Right now, the exam initiative is reaching how many students?
About 650 a year.
And how is that funded? So what percentage is BPS giving? I know the Latin School Association, I believe, still gives something.
Yeah.
How do we cover this? And who's covering this?
It's a combination between BPS funds, Mayor Marty Walsh's fund.
Yeah.
So he gives about 20,000. BLSA gives about 30,000, and then the rest is covered by BPS. And a lot of the money that is given is actually for some of the reforms that we made, because we can't use district funds to, say, provide transportation over the summer for students. So providing transportation, a lot of the outreach work that we've been able to do, and a lot of partnership work that we've been able to do has been because of that extra money coming in outside into our kind of nonprofit piece. So we hold the money in our BEDF account that comes in from BLSA and from the Martin J. Walsh Foundation. And then we spend about $100,000 out of district funds to put on the program.
Well, I guess I have a question about just at what point do we transition this out of the Marty Walsh Fund and Latin School Association Fund to something that the district owns? One, to make sure it's sustainable. I don't know who the next mayor will be. Yep. But also this idea that the exam initiative, of course, benefits Latin School in meeting their diversity goals, and they have work to do, and they know that, and Ms. Scarrett is amazing and gets it, but also the other exam schools as well, which may not be blessed with other resources as Latin School, and both of us are Latin School alum. So I understand that, but at what point do we bring that into our space? I would love to see have more of a conversation about that, because I think that's important. I don't think that just it should be in these funds that are external. I think because this is important work and it's about changing the demographics of those who are attending our exam schools and giving them an opportunity to attend, that we think about funding this in a better way.
Okay.
Thank you so much for you guys for being here. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to drill down a little, Cindy, on The state involved, 2017, 2018, 219 state involved. How many are residential placements?
So what happens is if they're placed in another location and they don't have group homes left to place students at for their residents, they'll use residential schools.
Okay, so do we know how many of the 219 are in that?
I can definitely get the breakdown, because I do want to take out the students that are associated with DOIS and the Department of Corrections, so I'll
Right.
get you that breakdown.
And then compare it to 2013, 2014, because that's where I'm seeing the largest increases in state involved,
Yes.
and why the large increase just recently, basically, the last couple of years. Anyway, thank you. Councilor Asabi-Joy.
Thank you. And I'd also want to know the average cost per student, especially both in the state-involved category, but then the non-state involved. How much are we spending per student for out-of-district placement?
Okay.
I think 2 years ago, my calculation, including transportation, was about $108,000 per student. And, you know, based on all of our other spending, that number will be greater at this point. So I'm very curious as to how much we're spending. Do you know the average for the non-state involved and/or the state involved, how much we're spending per student?
So an average day school in Massachusetts, probably, it would average about $75,000 for tuition.
So 75,000.
About.
Is that, so
As
this is a budget hearing. Do you have that dollar amount per student that we're
I
spending?
don't. I can get it for you, though. The dollar
Okay.
amount per student. 'Cause
So how much do you spend as a department?
as a department, we have a $95.2 million budget.
95.2. And then how much of that is spent on, what, do you know how much per student we're spending on education, educating those students?
Out of district?
But any of them. So how much are we spending in district?
Right. So in district, it's based on the weight. The weights will vary, will be determined of what we're spending per program.
So
like,
the average
for-
cost of a student with special ed services in the district is how much?
I would say the average is probably 15,000, but that's including, like, you have students that with a specific learning disability, their weight is less, so they're more about 12,000, and our students with autism and emotional impairment hover about 20,000.
All right, so the average is 15 for an in-district placement, but we don't know out-of-district. And that's a significant amount of students, like Councilor Siomo said. So I would just imagine in a budget hearing, we'd have the information on how much we're spending.
Out of district per student, okay? I don't have it,
Yeah.
I will get it to you as
Yeah.
soon as possible.
Okay. So last year, there was an investment made in technology to support the special ed department. That's not listed as a priority for this year. Can you talk a little bit about that investment, and are we continuing with that technology, or?
So I covered it as the Ed Plan rollout is the technology investment that we made. It's an IEP system rollout that we started in late August 2017. The rollout happened over the course of the school year. We are absolutely continuing with it. The cost drops now because it's not the rollout year. So we're about, the maintenance is in the budget is about $200,000 to continue to have the system. And then we have some different things we're adding just to enhance it for Boston Public Schools specifically, not just using the state IEP, but we are definitely continuing with it, absolutely.
And have we been able to maintain data input from both the teacher and the evaluator's position?
Yep, so this year, this is the first year of our gathering all of the data, so we have one solid data set, so every student had to be entered this year to have their meeting, basically, so not every student's in Ed Plan yet, because we have meetings that go till June.
Yep.
And once June happens, we'll have the complete record of all the students in the district. And the ease of entering is much better than it was with SEMS, and so there's definitely a lot more data that's available to anyone that can access the system.
And I would imagine through our work around chronic absenteeism that we'll use some of that data to inform who is absent or late and why, or tardy and late and why. So you and I have spoken, exchanged emails online about some math specialists and interventionists that are licensed appropriately for high school math, and that it was a very specific case. But can you talk about some of the support services for students requiring special ed services at our exam schools?
So they purchase their teachers and their staff the same ways every other school does, so they do have an allocation made for students with disabilities. A lot of their students, all 3 exam schools have students that would be considered emotional impairment internalizing, so they have a higher, their emotional impairment weight, they're a little higher. They also all have resource students as well. So the resource students carry the weight to then purchase the staff that's needed to make sure that the services are put into place. With the specific case, but then pulling it out to more generalizing, to be more general, we're figuring out what we're doing for the rest of this school year. I was able to actually meet with the families, which was really great, and get some great ideas. So that's moving along. And then next school year, I know that there are 2 teachers that are added for that school.
Yeah, and it's less about that one particular case and more about the support services in general, because often the exam schools are seen as not needing these services. How many students at the 3 exam schools, so the O'Brien, Latin Academy, and Latin School, have learning disabilities or have an IEP or a 504?
That number of students from each school and then combined, I would need to get to, and I get it to you by tomorrow, but I did not pull the numbers from each
All right,
school.
how many students in Boston Public Schools have an IEP?
As of the count on, we did a poll in mid-April, and that number is 11,991.
How many students have a 504?
The 504, I need to pull that one specifically on the 504s.
Okay, yeah, I think it's just, that's important information to know so that we're aware of what our the student profile is across the district. There was also a question regarding the way that students with IEPs and 504s, in particular IEPs, are assigned to high schools coming out of our middle schools. And that there's a difference between the way that they're assigned or apply to all high schools except for Madison Park. So high schools typically have strands, and Madison Park does not have a strand. So it makes their ability to properly staff ahead of time more challenging. Can you talk a little bit about why one school would have a different process of students being enrolled that have an IEP than others?
Yep, so Madison Park is a vocational technical school, so they have Chapter 74 rules that they're following for the admissions policy. So we can't place students actually in Madison Park. What happens is that they have their lottery, and the way that their admission policy works is how the students that arrive in 9th grade arrive the way they do. So we do the best we can to do the projections based on students that exist, and then what we've seen in the past for what the trend has been with the admissions policy, and then we support the school once September happens is when we can support the school and who actually arrives at the school, because we don't place there.
Okay. So students going to Charlestown High, if you had a particular SPED code, you maybe wouldn't see Charlestown as an option for you if you were coded differently?
Yes, if you have a different disability, yes, based
Okay.
on where the strands are located.
I think that it would probably, because of that nuance with Madison Park and the Chapter 74 rules, that it would probably be helpful if we maybe helped them with some of their staffing opportunities early on, so they weren't, I think they're feeling caught off guard with that nuance.
Okay.
And then regarding staffing, in page 30 of the BPS budget book, there's you state that the department will focus on hiring highly qualified related service staff to provide supports in a wide range of areas, from special speech therapy to applied behavioral analysis, as well as ensuring the appropriate supervision of these staffs. Can you just talk to me a little bit about that related staff? How many, and perhaps where they may be assigned?
So the related services staff that need to be hired, the total we have district-wide is 252.3 FTE. And our ABA specialists and BCBAs, the total we have is 107 FTE.
And what is their role, and why are we making this a focus of ours?
Because the central office is that's where they're located for essentially, that's what this office of special ed is focusing on. Obviously, high-quality teachers in the schools are important. The schools are paying attention to that, but we want to make sure that everyone we're hiring through central office that we're deploying out to the schools are of high quality.
So just a licensing, that's a licensing piece?
It's a licensing piece and also the supervision piece that was said there. So like the BCBAs, like we've increased our number of BCBAs as well in the district to make sure we have the appropriate staffing and supervision for the positions we have.
Thank you. And then Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
The look bill was referenced, and I think I don't know too much about it, so I promised to go and do a little bit of homework around that. But I do wonder, when we talk about supporting our diverse English language learners across the district, are we also looking at shifts in the demographics and being able to support English language learners of one of the new or upcoming languages? So we have I know a trend towards many more Arabic-speaking students across the district, but we don't have the Arabic-speaking teaching staff to support them. So how do we look at those trends, and how do we support those students and those schools in that work?
So every year, and this is even for our current programming, we work with planning and analysis to look at the language groups and see what the trends are, to see where we are seeing an influx of linguistic communities. And so as we're going and speaking to the schools and their communities around what the opportunities are for their school, we are providing them with data around what the linguistic community is of the population right around them. And so we're hoping that that will inform those decisions. And those populations and those linguistic communities, the way that data is falling is definitely, it can be surprising to, like you said, there's more Arabic speakers. So we look at that yearly, and we'll continue to look at that yearly in order to determine where our programming lies. Our eventual goal is to have programming in all of our 9 major languages, Arabic being one of them. However, we are definitely prioritizing based on the overall language need in the district. So for example, we have Spanish programs and we have a Haitian Creole program, and that immediately follows what the language capacity of or what the linguistic communities are of BPS. So Spanish is the highest, Haitian Creole is the next, and then Cape Verdean Creole is one of our future priorities. So that is how we look at it, is based on the overall population.
And I'm assuming you work with human capital on recruiting teachers that do have a fluency in those languages.
Yes, in fact, this year newly, the ELL task force, which is a subcommittee of the school committee, actually has another committee which is specifically for the ELL task force and for the Office of Human Capital to work on that collaboration of recruiting more bilingual staff.
Great.
And also in just making more robust the data collection system that we have.
Right. And then my last series of questions, and I promise that will be it. I've got birthday cake at home eventually. Excellence for All, you know, I think that we're starting to see some gains in that work, and I think that's exciting. And we have the EFA cohort versus the BPS, I guess, regular cohort. Can we also look at the advanced work classroom data? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I am a fan of advanced work, and I don't think advanced work, I don't believe advanced work should be replaced by EFA. I think EFA should be what we're doing across the board and giving opportunities to students that can achieve at a much higher level to do that. Mm-hmm. We do it with our exam schools. We do it with some of our application schools. But I think that it's important to include that data.
Okay.
And so I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the gains EFA has made, but then also in relation to AWC.
The specific gains academically, or are you talking about the demographic differences?
Both. I mean, we're looking for increased academic achievement
yes.
and success, but we're looking to share it among all of our students.
Exactly. I think the difficulty with we have a data expert that is working with EFA around that. I think the difficulty is that the cohorts of kids are so different because of the filtering mechanism of AWC that it's almost apples to oranges when we're talking about bringing a program to all of our students, no matter where they come from or where their access points are. I think is a much better comparison to compare EFA classrooms with general ed classrooms that don't have EFA. And how they fare. Of course, we want the outcomes that AWC students have with all of our students. But I think research-wise, it's a difficult comparison because of the group of kids that are in AWC. You know, I have Regine Pierre, who runs EFA, if you want to make a comment on that, or come on down.
And then while she's coming down, can you talk just about the goals of rolling out EFA to all of the schools? Because now we're creating another discrepancy between students who don't have AWC or if
Exactly.
EFA.
Yeah, so we never wanted EFA to be a program. I know we needed.
It should be what we do. I agree, it
Exactly.
shouldn't be a program, but when it's only in a few schools,
Yeah.
it's a program.
And the problem with it is to pilot a model. You can't do it with the whole district, and so we had to, I think, save that space for 3 years specifically for those 13 schools that were very much matched our demographics to see what worked, what didn't work, what supports were necessary to get certain gains, and I think that's the work we're muddling through now. I think we have the start of a process of looking at how would you use the pillars of EFA to then start certifying schools as EFA schools or not, right? And then thinking about how we could spread resources in order to support schools.
Not spread resources, add resources.
Yeah,
It shouldn't be a game of spreading.
Yeah,
add it.
yeah. Well, add and hopefully we continue to add, but I think, you know, thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of all of our schools and where we need to support better and where they're already doing a good job and they're already hitting some of our pillars, right? And so that's what I mean about spreading the resources in a way that can target what schools actually need to make their to make the bar of what EFA should be in all of our schools. And so that type of a process, maybe an accreditation process, we are communicating with not only early childhood with Jason Sachs around how he thinks about accreditation and our high schools around that to think if we can bridge a process across all the grade spans to talk about what is fidelity of implementation of a high rigor educational program for all of our schools.
Right. I will say, though, just to push back a little bit, when we talk about excellence for all, that as, you know, was in a few schools, growing to a few more schools, that if we want a program that's called Excellence for All, we need that to roll out so that all kids can access it. And that was, you know, this is in response to AWC, but behaving in many ways like AWC. When folks are critical about AWC, they're saying only a few kids get to access it. You're creating EFA. In the creation of EFA, I get the pilot, I support piloting programs to test them, but as we see those gains, we need to roll it out so that all students can access it.
I 100% agree with you. Yep.
So just a point about the last comment. That's well taken, right? And so part of my collaboration with Jason Sachs and the high school office is understanding how to roll it out in a way that makes sense. And so we have been talking about accreditation because it makes sense. Part of the model that we have in EFA and also Jason Sachs is a level of support that doesn't necessarily happen in all places. And so we have very targeted support. So that's why we're looking at accreditation. But Dr. Chang is very interested in rolling out to all schools, to all elementary schools. Again, to do that, we're looking at accreditation and how many schools we can support per year until all schools get EFA. So that's one. The second point I wanted to comment on is around outcomes, right? Looking at whether or not we're closing the achievement gaps in those places and comparing AWC, regular classrooms, and EFA classrooms. So to that point, I wanted to maybe share a little bit of our logic model and why there's a kind of a slow go at looking at just maybe MCAS, right, the quantitative measures. To do the work that we're doing, we're first looking at like the short-term and then intermediate outcomes, and then the long-term outcomes around quantitative measures. And so part of what we've been looking at first is how our teacher instruction practices changing. What are the, I guess, maybe soft skills that students are gaining from that, and then looking at MCAS and those kinds of things. We've also changed or added the look at 21st century skill as an absolute outcome. So that's why we've invited you guys to the capstone to see what the work that we're doing. What we have seen for schools that are engaging in certain work, that students are exhibiting growth in those soft skills. So in writing, for example, are they able to write more robust pieces in certain genres of writing, for example? In our math professional development and our math work, how are students developing in certain math concepts? So we're paying attention to that as well as paying attention to the MCAS, and we're trying to, as we're going through, I am having constant discussions with our coaches about making sure that we're moving towards those quantitative outcomes. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley.
Mr. Chairman, so what's the total BPS student population? 57, 58,000, thereabouts? 56?
6-ish.
So it's down.
It's about the same for a long time.
The same,
I
but
think the other day someone said that 60,000 kids come through the system during the school year, but the regular everyday population is.
okay. It's been static since in my time on this body. And what's the number of special ed students that need special ed?
11,991 as
Le-
of mid-April.
And is that number the same, more or
That
less?
number's a little higher.
Little
than it has
higher.
been, yeah.
And
that is
that's
actually-
about 20%, thereabouts.
It's risen about 1.5% over the last
Okay.
year.
And the total special education budget is about $236 million?
Yes, the
Okay.
total, including weights.
Including
Including
weights,
the
teachers,
and
everything,
central
your
office,
salary,
yes.
everybody, great,
Yep.
okay. And have we, other than the state-involved students that are receiving out-of-district placement, have we seen any other trends in special accommodations that we cannot meet?
So what's happened a lot with the out-of-district placements that are in our purview that we work on, a lot of our students, students with autism didn't have the programming about 10 years ago.
Yeah,
The
no,
program
I
wasn't
remember,
here.
yeah.
So as the district was building the capacity for that programming, we obviously still had students. And the students were able to stay with us for a while, but once it got to middle school, high school, was when there was a transition of a lot of students moving that needed more services because of a lack of previous.
Than
So-
what we, I see.
than what we're able to do.
Yeah.
So that a lot of the students that we have, so there is a population will always go out. We do have a population of students, for example, that go to our New England Pediatric, which is in Billerica. There's a very, very high level of need. They're very medically involved, and their level of learning is very complex. That to build a program here would not be cost effective because
Okay.
the winner exists. But some of the students with autism that have gone out. That's the biggest uptick that I've seen is, again, the students with autism and at the middle school, high school level.
But these students with autism at the middle and high school level entered the system when we began to invest more, 10, 7, 6 years ago.
Yes. So the students that are, the students that are existing that, when they're going, I was about middle school, high school, so I would say that we were at the beginning of building the program, investing much more and doing
Yeah.
much better, but those kids are 3, so what we're seeing now is 9 or so, and they're not, those students are still with us. We still have a lot, we're keeping a lot more students.
Yeah,
with the
no,
program,
I hear that, and again, I'm not trying to be argumentative
No.
here. It's just, this is something that it bothers me because I don't know that we're investing, we're working hard. I don't know that we're necessarily working smart in terms of capturing these things. I will give Dr. Carol Johnson enormous credit in this space because she is someone who felt, although I disagreed with her on certain issues, she is someone who felt very, very strongly that BPS owed it to be able to serve every child that we could, and she put a lot of money through us, put a lot of money in these things. So I guess we're talking about a number of sort of student populations here. The state involved, or we'll separate that for now, but to suggest that we cannot serve students at the middle and high school level who have autism because they weren't given the supports early. Enough time has passed that we should be able to address that. So I would just urge you for, a budget that continues to grow where student population continues to stay static or special needs students goes up a little bit. I really think that we need to invest and ultimately will save money. On that, I appreciate slide 26 on your PowerPoint. It sort of goes through all the FTEs for Office of Special Education. Self-explanatory, OT, PT, speech, pathologists, about 252. One-on-one para is coverage. I assume a coverage para is a para that can cover sort of float around a little bit and
Yep,
serve?
when we have people out on leave, so for our
Gotcha.
one-to-ones, yep.
Okay. School-based coordinator, that's assigned centrally but reported on school budget. So is that, are there 104, there's 104.2 FTEs, is that one at 104 schools?
There's not a full-time person at every school. There's a formula that we use on the number of students that are at schools.
Okay.
So that's 104.2 total.
So every school has one, just
Yes.
not
Yes,
necessarily a
not
full-time?
5 days a week,
Gotcha.
yes, yep.
And what are clerks?
The clerks are the support staff for the coordinators to help with the paperwork and the facilitation of
Gotcha.
getting meetings scheduled.
All right, so there'd be about 70 again. So at every school, again, not necessarily every day a week. That's
Yes,
the
yep.
average. Okay. And then ABA specialists in BCBAs. What are those?
So the ABA specialists are the direct service providers for our students that require ABA in their IEP.
Okay.
The BCBAs are board certified behavior analysts. They're the people that they're the supervisors of the ABA specialists. So we're increasing the number that we have. We started about 3 years ago with 7, and we're going to be up to 9 this year.
Okay. And inclusion support teams. Explain that as 18.
It was an investment from last year. So the 18 that we have, this is for next year. This year we had 12. We're increasing by 4 for 4 more community field coordinators that will be added to expand the teams to bring
Wouldn't
us
it be 6?
No, it's 4 more to bring us to 16, and we have 2, I have 1 more inclusion support person that oversees
I see.
all of it. She's not really a direct person to the school. There's 2 people that do that.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. And then central office administration, 28.
Yep, that's a
your
special
team?
department. Yes, my team.
So you sort of oversee the program. You and your team oversee the program and aren't in the schools.
Yes.
Yeah, you visit the schools,
Right.
you check in the
Yeah,
schools,
but
but
we're
you're based
it's
there.
our compliance unit, all the different units.
Okay, and that 28 number is not included in the 57 number that we went over earlier. I know the answer to that. It's no. That was finance and the administration. Okay, and then as we talk about special ed, I am proud to represent both the Margarita Muñiz High School and the Rafael Hernandez School. Is there any movement to develop more dual language high schools or elementary schools in the system?
As programs or as schools?
Both.
Both, yeah. So yes, we are looking at various models right now. We do want to make sure that there is a pathway moving up for all of the dual language programs, and that we have seats for all of those coming out of K-8 Spanish programs into a high school seat.
That's great.
Oh, sorry. So yes, so as we are planning dual language moving forward, we're being very intentional about what the pathway is going to be for those students.
And how many of our students are ELLs?
17,442.
17,000. And the budget is about 10 million?
7.6 million.
Oh, 7.6 million. Okay.
And yes, next year it'll be 9.7 million. Sorry, there was an
You're
increase,
talking about-
yes.
yeah. So that's a $1.2 million increase, and that's for translation and interpretation?
Yes, and we also have other increases in our ESL core curriculum that we're investing in, as well as our investments in new programming for,
Chinese heritage, as well as
Aside for-
BTU collective
yes.
bargaining. Great. And thank you,
Yes.
Kate Sullivan, for your thorough notes. What do you mean by translation services? I know what it means, but do we subcontract that out for parents or
so
students?
we have a hybrid model. So we do have an onboard team of translators and interpreters. They mostly work on our general education translations. So, superintendent circulars and any general requests from schools around flyers, report cards, things like that. However, we do work with multiple agencies as well to send out many of our special education requests. We also vet out for requests for our lower incidence languages as well, so our in-house staff doesn't cover all 29 languages that we've been requested this year. And then also, we actually have a freelance model where we have been training our own BPS staff, because we're a very linguistically rich staff as well. We have been training them and certifying them as translators and interpreters so that they can help support that, and they get stipended for those hours outside.
And do we work with other city departments? If someone calls 911 and speaks, I can't even, I'll say Swahili because it's not as well known. I don't know that we'd have the capabilities. Do we work together?
We're open to working together. I don't
Yeah.
know that there's been any requests that are outside of
Okay.
BPS families.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
And tell me about sort of the overlap, ELL students who also need special accommodations.
So there are a little over 3,000 of those students, and we actually have added a central office staff person who represents both populations of English learners with disabilities. So last year, we added a coordinator for that, and this year, this past school year, we added someone else to support those students
And that's
as well.
that is a high, my back of the envelope math, but I'm a product of the BPS, so I know it's right, is that there's a higher percentage of ELL students with special needs than there are sort of the general non-ELL students with special needs, if it's 3,000 out of 11,000 as opposed to.
So we actually have 17,442.
Oh.
Sorry, it's about a third, so yes.
Yeah.
Our overall population is 21%.
Yeah.
And the ELs specifically, are of the students with disabilities, one-third, so yeah, it's
Yeah.
higher.
Yeah, okay. And then can you give us a breakdown sort of, and it may be in the packet, I apologize if it is, but the FY19 budget FTE for your department?
Yes.
Just curious for that. And then finally, did you say in your opening remarks that, I was writing furiously, so I may have it wrong, our former ELLs outperform sort of other systems in Massachusetts?
Yes.
And then did you also say our former ELL students outperform
Our native English speakers.
native English speakers?
Yes.
That's
Every year consistently.
That's both wonderful and horrifying at the same time. It's great, and it shows, and you know, my aunt is a retired BPS ELL teacher. I know how wonderful, you know, and rewarding it was for her. She retired after a 30-year career. But it also gives me some great pause that, are we missing something sort of with native speakers?
I do believe that the Look Act does offer us the opportunity to provide language programming for all of our students.
Yeah.
I do believe that language development and bilingualism and multilingualism is a missed opportunity in our earlier grades. We have seen overall that students who are bilingual do outperform. Their academic performance is just overall greater. You see that after about 7 years of being schooled in 2 languages.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that that's why the Look Act is so important right now, and part of the reason that we are looking at more programming.
Yeah. Do we offer foreign language at all of our high schools? I know this wouldn't be under your
Yes.
department, but do you know the answer?
I do not know the answer. I do know that we offer foreign language at many of the high schools, but I wouldn't be able to say if it was all of them.
And I'd be curious too, and I'll save this for the next one, but how many middle schools and elementary schools we offer as well? Just because I think we're on the same page here, it would seem to me that we're missing out on an opportunity if native English speakers aren't performing as well as ELLs, that we're missing. There's a
Right. And
disconnect here.
We are working with the World Language Department, which is under academics, more on expanding that programming, so expanding their foreign language options, the world language options. So the option that we are opening up at the Quincy Upper next year, for example, it's not a traditional dual language model. What we are doing is we are providing a heritage language model. Okay. So they already have the world language, and we're actually splitting it off to provide the heritage language to heritage speakers, and then the Chinese world language to speakers that are not Chinese heritage speakers. So we're looking at various models to make sure that we're meeting all of the needs of all of our students.
And I assume Spanish is the most frequently spoken language among our non-native speakers.
Yes.
And then
after that, it is Haitian Creole.
And then finally, are there any students that we send out of district because we can't offer them services that are in ELLs?
No.
Thank you.
Unless
Thank
they're ELSWDs.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Janey. Got back.
Hi, thank you. And my apologies for my delay. My medical appointment ran longer than I anticipated. Thank you all for being here and the work that you do. Welcome, Priya. I don't know if we've had a chance to meet. I appreciate the conversation on dual language. Certainly a big proponent of dual language expansion. I would love for every student in Boston Public Schools to graduate fluent and at minimum 2 languages. And the evidence is clear, as we've already pointed out, that our FLEPs are outperforming all other students, and it has to do with the power of the bilingual brain. I think you covered some of that in my absence, so I won't. I just wanted to kind of put in my plug for expansion. I do have some questions. I think teacher diversity has been covered, and I look forward to reviewing the tape, but I'm not sure if sub-separate was covered.
No. We've been on Opportunity Index, Special Ed, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Right, and so this is definitely connected to special ed and is most definitely connected to the opportunity and achievement gaps that we see in the district when we look at where Black and Latino boys are in the district and their lack of opportunity to learn in inclusive settings with their peers and what kind of trajectory that puts them on in the district. And we saw that through the Equity and Opportunity Report that CCE in Annenberg did a few years back. And I'm just wondering, what have we done since then to create more inclusive settings that are real and not dumping? And so if you could speak to that, and I know we're running late, but.
Sure. What I did cover a little bit was that since the school year 2013-14, we've had a decrease of 5% of students in substantially separate settings. So we went from 35% to 30% last school year. And we continue to want to move that and drop that and increase our opportunities for inclusive settings across the district. So we have opened many classrooms. We also have not opened as many more sub-separate, specifically around emotional impairment, because that is where there's a slide in the deck that breaks the student population down. Yep, it's on page 23. And I had highlighted on the slide when I spoke to it that this slide shows us the different types of disabilities broken out to high incidence, low incidence, and spectrum disabilities. High incidence being socially constructed to the point of the fact that we have too many students that are Black and Latino in substantially separates. Moving over the line to the race or all SWD and under emotional impairment, we're seeing that 48% of our Black students are being identified for that disability, which is too high. And
What percentage?
48%. 48%.
I'm not sure I heard you.
48%.
48%?
You heard me, yes. Yes, of students identified as emotional impairment are Black. The same phenomenon also exists for specific learning disabilities and our Hispanic students. So 49% of students that are Hispanic are found with specific learning disabilities that are clearly language-based disabilities.
And what do we account for such a high referral?
And so to that end, I think a lot of the work that's being done around culturally and linguistically sustaining practices is starting to move us a little bit in understanding how to teach students and teach them differently, educate them maybe differently, but not disable them in order to get those services. So a lot of the education around how we do things within the classroom differently is one thing that we're pushing towards. A lot of pieces around professional development. We're also making sure that we're, as a special ed department, providing more PD, not just to special ed teachers, but to all teachers. So we're looking at areas of ABA principals, or we're looking at executive functioning or UDL, all those different types of pieces to have more resources within the classroom for kids to be able to learn. But again, I think the social construction of the disability has a lot to do with the identification of students. I think that when you look at the low incidence disabilities, they will follow they'll follow the trend of the population more closely because it's medical generally, and it's going to happen. It's something that happenstance. Most of the low incidence disabilities, the high incidence one though, are social constructions.
And has the Inclusion Task Force started meeting again?
So the Inclusion Working Group, we met all year.
Or the working group?
Yes, yeah, we met all year. We split up into 3 areas that we focused on to have as an outcome for that group. One was a vision for inclusion, one was a budget and how to look at how we fund this properly so schools have the funding they need in order to build the programs that their students need. And the third part was around supports and PD that's needed in order to get everyone up and running to be able to educate more students with diverse learning needs. The report is slowly going to get to the school committee very soon, and then definitely want to be able to release all the work that we had done across that.
And in terms of the classroom, so assuming we have now an inclusive setting in a classroom, how are we in terms of moving toward really having the adult support that we need, the teachers? So not enough to have a teacher that is certified in special education and certified in ESL, but really making sure that we actually have the numbers in the classroom to support that, because otherwise it really can end up being dumping.
Exactly, yes. So a lot of the work that we did with the Inclusion Working Group, again, was around what are the supports that schools need and then the classroom needs in order to be able to educate all students. So one thing we're really really focus on keeping for the schools is that flexibility to build a program that their school needs. So across the system, a lot of the research that we did and the work we're doing in the inclusion work group shows that we have many different models of inclusion that are happening that were built at the school level. And
So what's the staffing for that?
there's a variety of staffing for what's happening across the district. So there's examples. Obviously, the Henderson is one that everyone thinks of quickly. That's a two-teacher model. There's other schools that have a teacher and a para in every classroom, and they have a special teacher.
How many classrooms have two teachers? Throughout, is that just the Henderson, or do
No,
we?
the Haley also does it too. The Haley is another place that they have strategic years that might have two teachers. But again, it's the flexibility across the needs of the student and the needs of the schools that we want to make sure we're maintaining for the principals to be able to build the programs that they need.
And is there like a 5-year plan of where we are that looks at the baseline where we are now, where we want to go
Yep,
in
so
terms of?
Part of the inclusion working group is to bring that the timeline, and a major part of that timeline is a budget part about how we're really looking at budgets and how we fund what we're doing. So we do have a timeline that came out of the inclusion work group about the different ways we might look at the weights and how we're we're level funded. I mean, we're not cutting anything, but how we rearrange how we assign the weights to student need.
And in terms of the population that was just mentioned, a third of all special education students are also English language learners. How is that population really being served? I know in the past, it's almost as you can check only one box. Either you are ELL or you're a student with disability. How are we really making sure that this population is getting the services that they need across the board? And either of you can, or you both probably
I was going to say,
should
yeah,
speak
so
to
we've been
it.
working quite a bit together, which has been great, the ELL office and special, specifically around our EL SWDs. I think that there's been a lot of movement in making sure that it's not either or. There's been a lot of education around that piece specifically for staff to understand that you're not one or the other, you are both, so you have to be, both have to be addressed, your ELL need and your disability need. So through that, and I know I've gotten a lot of, I've seen a lot of our movement through the SWD task force as well, the subcommittee that we're part of, getting a lot of supports from outside people as well to give us ideas on how to make sure that students are getting educated.
And if I could just add that Ed Plan or Easy IEP does actually have an additional component that allows you to put in language goals for English learners who have disabilities, and that was not something that was available with SIMS. So we've been leading a lot of professional learning with the coordinators of special education on how to ensure that schools or educators know how to use this appropriately and really put in very specific goals around the language development. Another thing that we've done is we've done sort of an audit of the old IEPs to see what sort of language objectives, if there were any, to see what they looked like so that we know how to tailor that professional learning for those coordinators.
And in the last hearing that we just had earlier today, there was a slide in the packet that showed a steep decline for both special education students and English language learners, which is deeply concerning to me, and a widening of the achievement gap. And, and this happened over the course of just the last couple of years. I think it was looking at the 2015, 2016 school year to this next, did you?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm wondering how do we explain this decline, and what are we, more important, how do we learn from that to then make sure that our students are getting what they need so that we're not seeing that the gaps increase?
Yeah, I think specifically you're talking about MCAS scores.
Yeah, it was. Was it 8th grade? I don't have it with me. It was in the last packet. Yeah, I think it was 8th grade.
It might have been
math and English.
Might have been 10th grade because I don't think you can. There's no comparison because they did the next generation MCAS for elementary all the way through middle. Yeah, I think that those are persisting gaps that we constantly have in the district. A couple of things that give me pause for optimism, specifically around suspension rates. We're starting to see suspension rates come down across the board in all of our subgroups, but specifically with students with disabilities and our Black and Latino students coming down at a rate that is higher than all the other subpopulations. And so I think some of the work around what she said, CLSP, cultural and linguistically sustaining practices, is starting to take hold a little bit. And that seems to be, when you look at early warning indicators, things like suspension are indicators of future future success. And so, we're at kind of the genesis of that work. It's been pushed down to the school level, so now all teachers, faculty, principals, department heads are receiving professional development around CLSP, and hopefully that'll make some inroads. I know that both offices have been really more focused on education versus compliance over the last few years. I've worked with them hand in hand in asset around our instructional vision for all of our students. So I don't know if they want to speak more specifically to those subpopulations.
I know the hour is late, and
Yeah.
I want to be mindful that we all have our next events to get to. So if I may just ask a couple of more questions rather than go there. You see a staffing increase in your office in this budget?
Yes.
Okay.
One more staff member.
Wonderful. I won't go into detail around Excellence for All. I believe it was already discussed, only to, I guess, point out a concern around continued tracking of our students, how young we're tracking our students, and that we still have a very multi-tiered system of advanced work, Excellence for All, and then everyone else who may or may not be in sub-separate or whatever, who may or may not be getting the services or education that they need. And so I can certainly talk to you offline about that. But I was hoping that you could talk about the Exam School Initiative and where we are. What, is this the third year?
Yeah, this is the third year coming up that we're planning for. So over the past 2 years, I can bring up the specific data points, but yeah, I mean, we've seen the program grow to around 650 students. We've seen the demographics kind of turn around from, when we first started reforming it, to having over 50% Black and Latino students. The students, Black and Latino students that are going through the program, I believe of the students that apply, Black students that applied to exam schools, 40% got in. It was around 65% of students that went through the ESI program who were Black got in versus like 35% who didn't go through that program and applied. And it's almost the same, a little bit more for Hispanic students. About 70% of Hispanic students that went through that ESI program got into an exam school versus 35% who didn't go through that program. So we're seeing major gains of the kids going through it. We're expanding now to have a small cohort in the 8th grade, so that, because there are some available seats moving into 9th grade into those, so we're trying to make a even bigger web to catch students and prepare them for the test.
And of those who are going into exam schools, and one would obviously argue that the education that students get in an exam school we should be offering across the board for all high school students, but for those who get in through going through this program, tell us where they land. How many are going to O'Brien versus Boston Latin Academy versus Boston Latin School? And are we beginning to chip away at increasing the diversity of Boston Latin School, which is part of why we wanted to start this program and expand opportunity and access?
Yeah, I can get you I don't have the specific numbers for where they are. I know I have a deck that has that, so I can get that to you. I'll tell you just anecdotally, it hasn't made much of a dent at the BLS level, but I think we also have to think about a plethora of other things that are involved in that. The test itself is only about 50% of what we look at when we do admittance. So grades are the other half, and so I think we're starting to talk more as a system openly around that fact, and the fact that there are certain schools inside and outside of BPS that know those facts, and there are schools within our district that don't know that fact, and so. I wouldn't want to accuse people of things like grade inflation, but like those type of issues are now becoming, I think, more common talk across the district.
Right. Could you tell me where we are in terms of implementation of the Opportunity and Achievement Gap policy?
Yeah, so we're in full implementation mode. We've broken the task force up into smaller subcommittees to overlook major bodies of work. So one is around teacher diversity. So much like the ELL task force has kind of a subcommittee focused on teacher diversity, we actually have diversity targets for every single school. That was part of the implementation plan, and a subcommittee looking at that, the implementation of that and the goals. I know over the next month or so, there's going to be a report card that is sent out around how schools are doing around their diversity. But for many streams of work, that's what's happening. And so we've broken up, and right now I collect bi-monthly the actual goals and the progress. Very soon we will have an online tracker that's real time, so everybody can see the goals, all of the action steps, and our progress towards it, whether we're on target, we're behind, or we're majorly off target.
And that report card will be available, you said, in a month's time?
I wouldn't want to put it as a month's time, but that subcommittee is working on a report card that they want to put out pretty soon as kind of a baseline for, I think it'll be more of an A, B, C, D, like how our school's doing. And then every year, successive year, we can talk about what were the diversity targets for each school and how
And is
how did
that
they do.
just on teacher diversity, or is it looking at other elements of the?
That one specifically around teacher diversity.
And in terms of the curriculum, and so, part of what is in the language is a decolonized curriculum, which goes beyond just offering elective courses that, examine Asian studies or Latin studies or Black history, et cetera, but really how we kind of overhaul the curriculum itself. Where are we? I know you at some point, was it a year ago or 2 years ago, introduced the maps. Do all of the schools have the more accurate maps?
So that was last year. So we had a rollout plan with the history department. So every classroom, I think it was like 3rd grade and 10th grade last year that dealt with world history got those. So another 2 grades are getting it this year. There's a map day coming up, I think in a couple of weeks, that we'll be holding at Bowling again as kind of a celebration of it. But to me, that was just symbolic, right? And so now academics is going through the process of looking at all of their curriculum and auditing it through the 7 forms of bias, which is a protocol that my office put out, not only around just overt bias, but what stories are missing, what stories are we putting like rose-colored glasses to. It's really 7 distinct steps around how we look at our curriculum. And then we're pulling together, and even out of our office, groups of teachers to actually write units of study aligned to curriculum around things like rice production in Haiti and imperialism and the banana republics and the banana monopolies. And so slowly we're starting to create units and bodies of study that can supplement our core curriculum. I think we need to double up on those efforts, but I think the first step is to look at what we currently have and make sure that any biases that we have in our curriculum, that we either address them or give advice to our teachers around how do you handle them.
Yeah, so I find that very encouraging. I think most people would admit that there are biases all across every aspect of society, and so that would also be true within, our schools, and all that we can do to support teachers and coming up, and particularly involving them in the designing of the curricula, I think is very powerful and important. I'd love to see more. I'd love to see kind of a timetable, because I don't really view this as a supplement to the core curriculum, but really how do we look at our entire system in doing this. And again, I know, no one else is here to ask questions. I hope to continue the conversation. I have many more questions, but I am mindful of the time. I hope to continue the conversation in future hearings and also offline. I'm very anxious in the 7 core principles?
7 forms of bias.
Yes, and how that is being rolled out across the schools. So I have a lot more questions, but I don't know if there are people who want to testify, so I will save them for later. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Speaking of testifying, is there anyone that wants to testify at this time? Seeing.
I'm going to ask more questions. Okay. Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Well, let me thank you for your time and testimony today, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you for that.